Hello, everyone. This is the group. Seven Widowed Fathers Reimagine Life. The synopsis by Pamela Clemens. Summary of the book, The Group. This book highlights the journey of seven men who lost their partners and are now trying to raise their children as single parents. These seven men come together for what was to be only 6 sessions, which turned into nearly 4 years. They share not only their grief, but the obstacles of raising a family. When they learn is that enough grief can come from friendship, survivorship, and a future. The book is broken down into 4 sections: unimaginable loss, adaptation, reimagined lives, and the epilogue. The men learn that the cycle of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are not emotions that are etched in stone. They also discover that their shared grief, they can begin to live again and fulfill the dreams they once had with their partners, that of raising a healthy family. Section 1 summarizes each man's journey that brought them to the group, along with the intent of Rosenstein and Yap in starting a group for widowed fathers. This section is made up of 7 chapters. Section 1 closes with the observation that the 7 men had developed a real bond towards each other, different than just group members and more like friends. Section 2 outlines their journey through being good enough, different griefs, learning to accept the loss of their wives, and how to reframe dating for themselves and their children after the wife's death. This section ends with one of the men leaving the group as he decides to remarry. Section 3 starts with the remaining men wondering what the one departed means about their ability to heal and move on. As they begin to reflect on what has transpired over the last 2 years of the group's existence, they have come to understand that they have adopted to a new normal and have begun to accept their new roles as both mother, father, and that of a single dad. This was accomplished in several ways, but one thing that stood out was how they relied on faith without even being aware of that fact. Free-form groups like this one give the facilitator a unique opportunity to observe group dynamics without having to orchestrate or diagnose the individual members. Lastly, the epilogue component was an opportunity for the facilitators to reflect on this first widowed fathers group and to determine if it was a success or a failure, whether to start up other groups or just allow the support group to end as each father moves farther away from the group. What the facilitators realized was that the need, dynamic, benefit, support, and the outcome remained primarily the same. Only the faces changed. The existence of this group once again proves that we have known about post-traumatic experiences. That is, that growth can emerge. This phenomenon is sometimes referred to as post-traumatic growth. Clinical realization, its social work implications. 3 clinical realizations of this book and its social work implications for social workers who facilitate groups are: establishing an open-ended format, refraining from predetermining the outcome, and group members are the experts. With the first one, establishing an open-ended format, when a social worker structures their group to be open-ended, it allows the group members to determine the amount of time with the group and the recognition of benefit as the guiding factor that will determine the longevity of the group. If group members are focused on an end date and not on the process, they have a tendency to hold back with addressing the deeper issues that were initially brought them to the group. This is the opposite of the case management approach, where establishing an exit date is an essential aspect of the process. A free-form structure prevents any group from feeling more like a class than a support group. Refraining from predetermining the outcome. Social workers need to not attempt to predetermine an outcome of any group. When social workers make the structural mistake, they indirectly begin to subconsciously direct the group members in a structured direction instead of allowing the group's path to be more organic in direction. Groups are established because of the recognized need with a demographic or within a community. This need is what should drive a group's direction, not its facilitator. An organic direction does not preclude the need to establish an outcome objective or establishing benchmarks by which to ensure their success. Group members are the expert, not the social worker. Through education, frequently social work students are left feeling that they may be the experts on how to help people from feeling or remove themselves from at-risk demographics. Group members may also contribute to this fact as they can look to social workers for answers to the crisis they face. The truth is the group members hold all the answers they seek. They are just not aware of or have confidence in the fact that they already have the answers they seek. It is essential that social workers refrain from the ease of accepting the quote expert status. Group member does need an environment and support necessary to identify the answers they seek from within themselves. Observations. Observation about the participants' process. In this section, we'll review the dialogue, the participation, and the empowerment of the gentlemen in the group. Observations and dialogues. The first key observation was how the participants engaged one another was through their open dialogue. Their overwhelming ability to share personal thoughts, emotions, and experience in conjunction with the ability to listen to one another contributed significantly to the success of each member of the group to heal, accept, and move on in life. This openness is evident throughout the book as each man struggles through the phases of grief, which the book outlines as unimaginable loss, adaptation, and reimagining lives. The participation. Most of the success of group therapy is gained because of the willingness of each person to participate, depending on their personal skills in the process. It is this willingness that leads the group's ability to take over the group's direction and prevent the facilitators from having to be the driving force behind the group's focus. When this dynamic occurs, group members gain a more in-depth understanding of their situation. With this understanding, they are able to reconcile the crisis and move forward with their lives. One way this is evident in the fact that the group was initially structured for 6 sessions, which turned out lasting 4 years. This is further evident by the fact that the facilitator's intervention was rarely required. Empowerment. The empowerment aspect of the group was exceptional. Each member of the group was able to take advantage of the elevation the facilitators provided, and then, in turn, elevate one another. We see this clearly in the section dedicated to adaptation. In this section, the men are trying to reframe their lives around grief, dating, being good enough, and family. As each man begins to address their needs as a person against the requirements of a father, they are supported by one another, by members of the group to their own feelings and accepted that it is all right to be human. Social work awareness, winding down, the therapeutic process of ending a group. When the facilitators reviewed whether or not to wind down the group, they were forced to acknowledge that the members had known better. The therapeutic process needed to be fluid enough to allow for the needs of the members to be achieved. Social workers are educated to believe that structure and organization are the means required to assist group members or clients in achieving their goals. However, the approach of termination can be a psychic shock that group members react to according to their preferred method of coping with anxiety. The group is finishing, and the fundamental issue for the members is how to handle the separation with the least personal discomfort. It is for this reason that social workers need to consider the type of group they are conducting early on in the process to determine the proper technique for the group, an open-ended termination date or a fixed date. Each type of end date has its pros and cons. Fixed dates allow for a known timeline for not only topics, but also for when the next session will start. A fluid date requires a different structure and an understanding of what the members need, which, in turn, means creating various reassessments times at which any member can exit or new members can enter. As author Rosenstein and Yap discovered in the book, the group, Seven Widowed Fathers Reimagine Life, the authors realized that the members of their group had much to teach them about abandoning the norms and adopting a newer concept of group termination. Social workers must come to allow themselves to consider newer techniques and the ability to look beyond the norms. This will allow them to seek and address the needs of group members. They want to help each member to regain maximum benefit from the group. That is why some social workers support the standards of continuing education units for field social workers. Personally, I support continuing education units for all graduating field social workers beginning in 2020. Group setting, professional changes, isolation as a support group. One theme I would like to now address in group setting as a direct result of the book is isolation in the time of a pandemic. Additional mental health issues that are arising as people are too scared or vulnerable as Americans struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has caused many Americans to change how they conduct their lives, with the elderly and those with pre-existing medical conditions who are affected most. These two sectors of Americans are also most likely to adopt as one of their techniques isolation based on the recommendations for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Isolation, what the Center of Disease Control and Prevention tells us about isolation and loneliness, was not based on either as a result of the pandemic. The CDC states, although it's hard to measure social isolation and loneliness precisely, there is strong evidence that many adults aged 50 and older are socially isolated or lonely in ways that put their health at risk. Recent studies have found that social isolation significantly increases a person's risk of premature death from all causes, a risk that may rival those of smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. Social isolation was associated with about 50% of increased risk for dementia. Poor social relationships characterized by social isolation and loneliness was associated with 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke. Loneliness was associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Loneliness among heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death, 68% increased risk of hospitalizations, and 57% increased risk of emergency department visits. Therefore, establishing a group whose structure mirrors that similar to the work of Rosenstein and Yap, this would model their work of widowed fathers and single fathers, were the first of its type. This work enabled professions to question the norms and begin to highlight theoretical changes as knowledge is gained.